Chapter 12. An Unwelcome Reunion. Until well after dark they sweated at the paddles, keeping the same flying pace. By and by the moon came up and threw a fine clear shine. Eben did not like it. "Too light," he growled. As always he spoke in a mutter, for sound carries over water and Indians have sharp ears. If it was plumb dark we might slip past without being seen, but we ain't got much hope in this witch's glimmer. "Do you think there really are more of them in front?" Guy was anxious. "Sure. That Cherokee buck was cocksure we'd get stopped." Eben spat over the side. "They're up to all kind of dodges, so keep your eyes peeled." The canoe sailed well in the middle of the current. They dared not go close to either bank, lest a blizzard of arrows flighted out of the dark without warning. All the while they kept a sharp lookout, but the wilderness slept around them and nothing stirred. The river widened as they flew on, keeping the rhythm with his paddle. Guy scanned the water and the shores. Broad and gleaming like a magic mirror, the surface glided ahead of them unbroken but for a solitary drifting log. The water was a flat sheet of silver, eerie under the pallid moonshine. The log swam lazily in the water, between them and the southern shore. At first Guy took no great heed of it. It floated gradually inward to the middle of the stream, in a way that would bring it close to them when they passed. Some moments went by before it struck him that there was something odd about its behaviour. Suddenly he asked himself why it swung across the current like that instead of travelling straight down with it. "Eben," he muttered urgently, "that log in front." It was close now, only a short way off. Eben's paddle clattered in the canoe behind him, and the trapper yelled, "Go hard, boys, for your lives!" On the heels of his shout came the ear-splitting crack of his rifle, terribly loud in the quiet night. There was a quick flurry of splashing by the log. A long shape arched upward like a salmon leaping and fell back again. The log picked up speed, driving towards them as they sent the canoe along for all they were worth. Knowing they were seen, the Indians made no further attempt to hide themselves, and their heads showed as they used the log as a screen against the bullets they expected to follow. When no more came, the red men left the trunk and struck out boldly. They were good swimmers. There were about a dozen of them, their muscular arms sending their lean bodies through the water with superb ease. Frantically, Guy and his friends bent to their paddles until she fairly flew. The light handy vessel skimmed along, her curved bow inches out of the water. She hardly seemed to touch the surface. It was to be a near thing. If one of the swimmers got close enough to touch her, he would capsize them. When that happened, they must all drown or be killed on shore when they crawled out. There would be no escape. A black head swirled towards them, arms threshing in long-reaching curves. In the moonlight, Guy caught a glimpse of white eyeballs glaring and a cruel hawk-like face. The brave was only 2 yards away. With an eel-like dive, the man hurled himself to grab at the gunwale, and Guy beat at him with the paddle blade. There was a yell of rage cut off in a choking gurgle, and the face went under. Then they were past. The Indians could not reach them any longer. Once again the barbarous whooping came from the darkened shore, but this time there was a note of anger and baffled hope in the maniacal sound. Eben laughed softly. At last he seemed to have lost his uneasiness. "That's dished 'em, I guess. I should reckon they was the foremost scouting party of 'em all, by the rumpus they're making." "Are we clear now?" Alistair spoke grimly. The hilt of the rusty sword lay near his hand on the piles of skins. "Not on your life, Mac," was the emphatic reply. "You can bet they'll chase us as hard as they can scout. We still got to do some mighty fast travelling to get through." Onward they swept, giving the paddles all they had. All were desperately tired. For nearly 48 hours they had been racing at top speed, with no sleep and little food, and weariness was sapping their energy. They could not go on much longer without rest. Still, they dared not halt. The Cherokees were pursuing swift and vindictive, and there was a long way to go before they reached Foxley's trading post. One at a time they took short naps, one dozing while the others paddled, trying to fend off their utter fatigue. In this way Guy was stirred out of a drowse some hours later by a prod in the back from the butt end of Eben's paddle. "Come on, Yonker, time to get them peepers open." Yawning, Guy unshipped his own paddle sluggishly and blurted, "What time is it?" "Around midnight. Time for Riach to snooze a bit now. He's been going strong all the way down." The little Highlander let his head sink on his chest. For all his small size, he was wonderfully strong and had been paddling hard ever since the portage. Guy grinned as he saw the tousled skull nod. He had come to be very fond of the short man. But the adventures of the night were not yet ended. Towards dawn they swept around a bend in the river and saw the sky turning grey in the east. Another wide stretch of water snaked ahead of them, like dark glass now that the moon was low. Guy uttered a sharp exclamation. "Look!" he jerked out. "There's a fire on the bank." It was true. Low down on the southern shore a rich bloom of golden light flickered. It lit up the trees with a dancing yellow radiance and threw glowing flakes across the ripples in the water. Eben turned the flat of his paddle against the current and took some of the way off the canoe suddenly. "Backwater," his voice rasped, harsh and alert. "We'll take a look." "More Indians?" queried Alistair in his dry, quiet way. "No," said Eben. "Indians don't make big fires like that. Only when they're burning somebody's house down. That's a campfire. White man's work." "Who are they, then?" Guy was curious. He felt a lift to his spirits to think that they might perhaps have met friends by way of a change. "Hunters?" "Tutcha!" The scorn in Eben's tone was killing. "You don't think a woodsman's make a great silly blaze like that, do you? More likely some Johnny Raw from the coast who don't know any better." With a silent, cunning strokes he guided the canoe towards the place where the fire burned. When they came closer, they could see figures near it. Two were lying down fast asleep, while a third nodded over the fire, squatted on his haunches. There was a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Eben grunted. "Get ready to light out of here, if there's any trouble. I'm going to give 'em a hail." He shipped his paddle and took up his rifle. They glided nearer, just as the man with the blanket stood up to reach more firewood from a pile nearby. The blanket fell off and he picked it up to shake it out and wrap it round him once more, shivering. "I told you it was some donkey from the tidewater," Eben muttered with contempt. "Look at him, all dolled up like a foreign dancing master. What a rig to run the woods in." For when the blanket was off, the man by the fire was revealed wearing a fine brocade coat of green and silver. Whoever he was certainly no hunter. From his dress it seemed that he was a person of some consequence. Guy frowned. There was something familiar in the pose of the firelit shape, a rakish swagger that he had seen before. "That fellow," he whispered. "I've met him at some time, but I can't think where." Then he remembered where he had seen the coat. Sir Willoughby Lacey had worn it, back at the plantation on the day that Guy had stopped Anne Aubrey's runaway horse. The realisation shook him badly. What was Lacey doing here of all places? What brought him to this desolate wilderness, miles from his pleasant estate? It was at this point that Riach woke up. Once glance was enough for the squat Highlander. "Yon's Moll Smeaton," he croaked abruptly, the flash cull. He was right. At once Guy understood why he had known the rogue's strutting arrogance. It was the modest, blackguardly air of the gamester and bully that he was. No doubt he had stolen Sir Willoughby's clothes when he and his evil partners robbed the mansion. Eben changed his mind about hailing the villains. "That bunch is best left alone, I guess," he said. "I suppose they're on the run, same as you fellas." He had heard nothing of the robbery, having left before it happened, but he had seen enough of Exon and his crew to know that they were bad people to meet in a lonely spot. They looted Gervais Holly's winnings from the horse race that day, Alistair told him, and murdered Bully Joel for good measure. They will be desperate now, and ill folk to meddle with, I grant you. Yet they are white men none the less. Can we leave them to the savages?" "Maybe you're right," Eben replied in a grudging undertone after a pause. "Though I don't know as it'd be more'n their deserts. Do you figure they still got the pickings with 'em?" "The money matters less than getting out of this with our scalps," Alistair told him. "But if we could get it back, it might save us a hanging when we fare down to the coast again." "All right. I was going to just yell at 'em to light out of here, so they could take their chances as best they could. But if there's a chance of getting the plunder back, we'll go ashore." Guy was excited. If they could recover Mr. Holly's gold, it might gain lighter punishment for them when they reached the settlements, as Alistair had said. For come what might, all three fugitives knew now that they must go back, if they were lucky enough to get there alive. He breathed a warning. "Take care. They'll do us a mischief if it will profit them." They kept absolute silence as they paddled towards the shore. In the paling daybreak the canoe looked like a grey ghost. It reached the bank a little way above the fire and grounded silently under an overhanging of branches. They drew it up out of the water so that it could not float off again. Then, taking their weapons, they glided through the trees towards the fire. Smeaton did not hear them come. Guy saw that he was half asleep, his lids closed over his shifty eyes, as he hunkered before the glowing embers. A waft of warmth drifted towards him as he watched the sleepy rascal, and he had a swift memory of comfort, such as he had forgotten for many days now. "I give you good morning, Mr. Smeaton." Alistair stepped into the firelight. "I trust that we do not intrude." With an oath, the gamester threw off his blanket and jumped to his feet. His face was white as putty with shock. He made a strange figure as he crouched there, his fine coat filthy and stained with hard usage, and his shaggy hair and vicious face black with dirt. "You!" he exclaimed at length. "Where in the name of all that's scurvy did you start from?" He saw the sword in Alistair's hand and jumped back, to stoop at a small pile of dunnage, saying, "If that's your game, Mr. Sawneybuck, I can match you at it." He snatched up a rapier, which was probably another article of loot from the mansion. With it in his hand, he snarled, "Where did you come from, I say, and who's with you?" "Why, indeed, I came from the same place as you know very well," MacLeod said calmly. "And for companions, I have made better choice, if you'll forgive the comparison." The talk awakened the other two. Gil the pugilist rose from his blanket with the speed of a dangerous ape, huge and threatening. A heavy cudgel swung ready in his knotted fist. Exon sat up, his right hand hidden. His evil visage showed alarm and cunning fury. Bleared and ravaged, his features were gaunt over broad cheekbones, and his underlip jutted forward. For a moment he looked the fierce, cruel animal that he was, ready and willing to commit any wickedness that would give him an advantage. Then, as Eben emerged, with his long rifle covering the three villains by the fire, his face changed. The old false genial smile spread over it, and his good eye beamed with friendship. "So, you followed us here, my hearties, did ya?" he chuckled. "Well, fancy that. It'd be stretching the truth a trifle to say we're glad to see you. But now you're here, belly up to the warm and make yourselves at home." "I vow we're honoured by the invitation," Alistair replied silkily, "but we cannot loiter. If you will take my advice, neither will you. Unless you remove your carcasses very shortly, you will be meeting some lads who will treat you very ill." "What do you mean?" Exon lost his smug good humour. Alistair told him. When he had finished, the three rogues looked at him with suspicious furrows. The news had its effect upon them, as Guy could see, but they did not know whether to believe it or not. Finally Exon sighed, and then shrugged his shoulders with a chuckle. "If that's the lay, my bullies, we're certainly in your debt for the word. The least we can do is take advantage of it." His hand came out from under the blanket. It held Bully Joel's pistol, which he aimed steadily across the fire, and his chuckle became suddenly ferocious. "Just drop them tools of yourn on the ground, while we have a little chat. And do it mighty quick, or I'll put daylight through you."